Chapter 9. Hide and Seek. Hours passed. The gentle sway of the horse's gait beneath him had Finbar in and out of half sleep. Then a sudden halt jarred him back to waking. Major Danforth gripped Finn's knee hard. Shh. Finn followed the Major's gaze. 100 yards ahead of them was a haphazard camp. A bonfire blazed in the clearing. A ragged half-dozen men surrounded a young man in American olive drab, bound tightly to a long pole. The second horseman, a dragoon lieutenant, looked to the Major. "What say we enter in, Major Danforth?" he asked quietly. As the men around the bonfire pulled the young American off the ground, he let out a scream of terror. Danforth nodded. He turned to Finbar. "Dismount, Sergeant." Finn slid off the horse. "Should we fail, keep heading east. There's a farming town nearby. Seek shelter there." Finn nodded. Major Danforth raised his saber. "Straight through them, lads. Straight through." The dragoon lieutenant, Brian Hugh, and the third rider, Darren Tremaine, a sergeant of the Royal Lancers, gripped their weapons and readied their reins. "For God and England." Major Danforth spurred his mount's flanks, and the three cavalrymen charged through the woods toward the clearing. At the sound of the thundering horses, the monsters turned. They saw the coming cavalrymen and dropped the tied-up American boy, grabbing for their weapons. But it was too late. The Major entered the fire's ring and struck. His horse rode over the first man, a German sapper, then his saber struck the head of a German pilot, shearing through his skull and spattering the long leather coat with blood and brains. The Lancer, Sergeant Tremaine, speared a French Poilu infantryman through the chest, then reared his charger. Its front hooves caved in the face of a second Frenchman and landed hard on him, breaking the man's back. Tremaine pulled his saber free, but another of the pack of demons leapt up and wrapped its arms round his waist, trying to drag him from the saddle. He bashed his pommel down on the peak of the man's skull and wheeled hard left. His horse's hindquarters struck the demon and knocked him tumbling into the bonfire behind him, shrieking as flames wrapped him in their consumptive embrace. The dragoon lieutenant was last to engage. He followed the Major in and swept his saber right, slicing a diagonal tear through another of the demon's backs. The follow-through brought him up and over the other side of his horse. His saber came down clean through the head of the last dead man standing. Tremaine leapt from his mount and ran to the man impaled on his lance. It sat up, trying to wrench the spike from its chest and stand. Tremaine swung hammering saber blows, hitting the thing's head and shoulders as it rose to its knees, felling it back to the ground. He stopped swinging when it finally lay dead still. Tremaine yanked his lance out of the dead man's chest and ran over to the American boy. With deft saber cuts, he loosed him from the pole. "Come on then, mate. Up and at him." Tremaine helped him to his feet, grabbed his horse's reins, and vaulted back up into the saddle. The American took an offered forearm and scrambled on behind him. Without a word, Major Danforth kicked flanks and led his men out of the clearing at a canter. When they reached Finbar's hiding place, for the second time in his life, Finn was grateful to see an Englishman. Major Danforth reached down and helped him remount. As Finn settled on board, he turned to his men. "All right, gentlemen, let's get clear of the area before these are found. I suggest we keep as fast a pace as we can." They heard it. A war cry, ululating through the night. "Crikey," murmured the dragoon. "Stiff upper lip, Lieutenant Hugh. Stiff upper lip." The Major turned his mount and led the horsemen into the woods due east, away from whatever was prowling out there behind them. Finbar got a glance at the new passenger behind the Lancer, private, American, shaking, likely in shock. They made eye contact. Private James Cox gave him the best smile and nod that he could muster. But in his eyes, beneath the smile, there was only terror and emptiness. When James Cox had hightailed it off the train platform, he did not look backward. The yells from his companions slowly died away until no sound at all reached him. He never broke stride, hurtling away from certain death and the voice that spoke so clearly to him from the grave. He could not see them, but he could feel them behind him, giving chase, hot on his scent, hungry for his terror. James ran out of adrenaline and its accompanying steam half an hour in. When the demons caught up to him, he was bent over, breath heaving in and out, resigned to capture, all fuel from his terror spent. He did not even attempt to fight when they cornered him, leering and toying with their prey. He raised his hands and tried to smile for them, working charms that had no effect. Okay, fellas, you got me. It was more as though they caught him playing hide and go seek than anything else. He let them tie him to the stake without incident, and even attempted polite conversation as they prepared the massive bonfire. But these men spoke no English, and James spoke no Spanish, so the inquisitors could only communicate their intent to prove him on the fire by actually doing it. When James finally understood what they had in mind, roasting him alive like a prize hog on a spit, he decided he would like to resist. But by then, it was far too late. Major Danforth's cavalryman saved James's life in no uncertain terms. He was profoundly grateful. The British Knights he fantasized about since boyhood had finally arrived. He clutched so tight to the lancer that Sergeant Tremaine gently loosened James's grips 4 times before the boy could rein in his terror enough to hold the man's waist with some sense of propriety. Just as Finbar had done, he dozed in the saddle after they traveled for an hour without incident.